Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Books by Adrian and Livestream Sunday. Today's episode is all about RPGs, and we're talking with Tom. I'm sorry, I didn't ask how to pronounce the last name. Is it Dumbrell?
Dumbrell, nicely done.
All right. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I mean, seriously overawed by that incredible intro. It's incredibly dramatic, isn't it? It's quite something.
I don't mean to brag, but I get that a lot.
Yeah.
I tend to get like really into the animations at the beginning and the ends of the episodes, and it's always unique based on whatever we're doing that day. So
Well, I tried to employ a sort of under promise, over deliver approach, but that thing has got me. That's raised the bar right up there, hasn't it? So
you better bring your A game on Books by Adrian. That's what I'm talking about.
Sure, yeah.
Mr. Dumbrell, where are you? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what you do, and take it away.
Yeah, so I am in Essex, in England. So I'm around about an hour outside of London on the train. I basically am in my day job. I'm an individual who works in the travel industry. So I've had a heck of a past year. But with the kind of limitations that the travel industry's had and a little bit of time in and out of work, I've, I guess, taken on a bit of a side gig writing. So taken that hobby on, and I'm not sure I'd necessarily start listing it as a second career just yet, but I suppose that's my kind of my hot pursuit at the moment.
Yeah, man. Anybody in industries like that are so incredibly affected by what happened last year, it's interesting how everybody chose to use their time.
Yeah.
I work at a hotel, so our business definitely died a lot, but I happen to be one of the only 2 night auditors, so I'm kind of inexpendable. So I still worked throughout the entire year. Nothing really changed for me except for the fact that there was nobody around. So like you, I had a whole bunch of time all night when I'm working on night audits. So I started writing my first novel. I
think that's been really interesting. I think so I was in sales, so it was one of the first sort of parts that got cut because, of course, there was just no sales to be had, although it's kind of to a certain extent starting to be one of the positions that are some of the early ones that are coming back. So, travel businesses want to get people back in. They want to start selling again. So I'm lucky to be back in, have taken on a new role. But yeah, it's been the conversation. It's been not talking to people in the industry about, necessarily just how gross the last year has been, but actually has been to say, well, what have you done with the time? What have you, and not to judge, how wisely you use your time, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. But like you say, new hobbies, some people have moved into new careers. That's the positive, I guess, we can take from this past year.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that there's like really no wrong way to spend that time, because you got to figure that there's a lot of folks that were workaholics before and maybe took some time off to actually relax for once, and do nothing for a whole year, just kind of lay about. So yeah, however you choose to use this crazy time that we've sort of been given / forced to take on, just you can make the best of it. That's what I think. Right on. So with that time, you wrote a book, or more than, you started a series. Is that right? It's a series of books.
It's a strange thing, really. I mean, I suppose for me, it was, I would say COVID was the moment I'd been waiting for. That would be a very, very bad misquote of
it feels really weird to say, but I know exactly what you mean, because I feel exactly the same way when it finally happened. And not just COVID, but like when the BLM movement was really like kicking off after George Floyd, and there was riots and all kinds of crazy stuff happening. Like, of course, horrible. All this is horrible. But at the same time, I was thinking, kind of about time. Like, let's do something about this stuff. Now that we have all this time to not work, how about we put all that time into fixing this crap hole? Let's dig in. So absolutely. I know exactly what you mean.
And so I've probably, like a lot of people who are working on a project, I've got laptops full of unfinished projects, 1 page, 10 pages of writing, various characters that you know, didn't really have a heartbeat. They weren't actually ever going to be anything. They were just about me putting pen to a page. You know what it's like? Sometimes you read a particular author and you're just like, man, I want to recreate that. And you start writing it and you think, no, that's not my place in the world to try and recreate poorly someone else's fine work.
Yeah.
And so I just strangely then, in about the last week of my travel employment before the pandemic, I just woke up one day with an idea. And to be honest with you, it was really a sort of 18 chapters. I just woke up and I was like, I'm going to pen this out. I'm just going to broad outline it. And I didn't really have the, you know, the theme really, or maybe what the message was or anything like that. I just had a story, a tale that kind of just poured out of me. And I just said, this is it. I've got something, you know, legit here that I need to start working on, because I'm in that hotspot now, and we all have them, where it's like, I know that anything I write right now is going to be good. And then you have days where everything you write is absolute garbage and you have to ride those out. So yeah, so I wrote the first book, The Look of a King. For visuals here, you know, they just sit around the house, and then didn't really, and then you know, began that whole process, and ultimately it's become a second book, and then now it's become, you know, a trilogy of books, which I'm currently working on the third one. So I'm on a bit of a streak with it, and then I'll probably never write anything again, probably by popular demand, I should imagine.
No, not at all. I mean, first of all, that cover looks great. If you can hold it up again, I'm going to make you a little bigger here. Hold up the book again, because I really, I bring it in front. You're right there. I love that cover. That is such a. I mean, there's a lot of subtlety to it, and yet I can tell there's a lot of complexity in there as well. It's very interesting.
It was cool. It was just the whole thing was pretty cool, really. I ended up moving out of London when I lost my job in travel, just to basically come back home to Essex, where the cost of living is lower. And my wife moved with me, and she's actually from the US, so she'd only lived in London up until that point in this country. And my wife also happens to be an editor, so she was able to do the edits on my book, which put some interesting strains on our relationship. As someone who hadn't studied writing, I'd never really had anybody tell me how bad my writing was, and she's very free with the red pen. So
that's
she,
good though, man. That's good.
She was
only gonna make you better.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the cover, I happen to know a chap who does cover design, and I took him an idea, and you know what it's like when you've got quite a clear view and you can communicate that, the stuff that comes back is just like bang on, because the guy knew what I wanted and he knew how to just take it to the next level. So
nice.
It's so important to have that visual with your book at the moment. I mean, I think about Instagram and things like that. If you haven't got a cover that's going to reach out to people, it's very hard to kind of cut through the noise. So I was
especially
really pleased
when the cover is a tiny little, you know, thumbnail. Sea of other thumbnails that you're just scrolling past. Like, it's hard to stand out for sure.
It is. So yeah, very happy with the way it's turned out.
Very, very interesting. And I brought you on today's episode because you have a knowledge and affinity for RPG games. Is this correct?
Yes. Yeah. So, well, it's interesting because I sort of thought, you know, when we were speaking about maybe what we would talk about, and you know, it's funny how your hobbies, as you kind of get a little bit older, they start to become sort of less and less. And then you realize actually the hobbies you do have are maybe things you've been doing for a long time, or things that maybe it's an instinctive answer to say, I'm really into this. But actually it got me thinking about how that's changed over the last few years. And actually it's very interesting that I think, you know, my journey with role-playing games, video games, is very much in line with my journey with books as well. So in the end, it ended up becoming a bit of a kind of a cool subject. But I mean, I've had video game consoles, you know, pretty much, you know, from the moment I could play them. I'm going to throw it out. Is that the same for you? Are you a gamer?
I'm a big Nintendo guy. I've been a Nintendo guy my entire life. I've had one of every Nintendo system except the Super Nintendo, because my best friend had one and I would just go over there and play it. But other than that, I've had them all. But I'm not a huge gamer in the sense that I have a huge collection of games or anything like that. I basically get every new Nintendo for whatever the new Zelda game is.
Okay, sure.
I'm addicted to the Zelda games. Anytime one comes out, I hop on it right away. And when I don't hop on it right away, I'm anxious for like a year and a half until I do hop on it. Other than that, I'll dabble a little bit in like, multiplayer games with the family, Mario Kart, that sort of thing. But when I was really young, when computers were just starting to become household things, and my dad, he got really into computers. He started building them in our basement and selling them and stuff like that. So we always had like really cool computers around the house. And so I played a lot of the early games like Duke Nukem, and what was the, now I'm blanking on the name, but the one where it's another monster killer and you're going through corridors, really really old
Doom.
school. Doom, yes,
Doom.
the original Doom.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a history with games and all that. I'm just not a huge gamer, and I don't really play any tabletop games, which is another reason I reached out to you. I wanted to talk to you about those. I really do love video games, especially again those Zelda games. The one that came out in 2017, Breath of the Wild, is
Mm-hmm.
just this enormous open world where, I mean, it's been out for 4 years and people are still finding stuff in that game that we didn't know was in there, and things that you can do that we didn't know that we could do. That game is just incredible. It's just full of possibilities. And so like that's the kind of stuff that excites me, where
Yeah.
you can go anywhere and do anything,
Sure. And that's
Yeah.
and that was really that, and that's the same. That's really where I'm at with that. So for me, I went the PlayStation route. So for me, it was Final Fantasy, and I know that there's always a Final Fantasy. There's a bit of a Final Fantasy Zelda divide. So I've probably never given Zelda the amount of time that I should do.
Yeah.
Although I do have a Nintendo Switch, and I have played the game that you mentioned, so I can see its merits. Like I will go on record as saying it's a pretty decent game. But yeah, I think for me, the role-playing games.
PlayStation guys.
Yeah, I know. Well, what can I say? I didn't choose it. It was a Christmas present, and I was forced down that path. So there we go.
Yeah, once you're in, it's hard to get out. I understand.
I know. Yeah, right.
My sister is a big PlayStation gamer. She has all the Nintendos as well, but she's really heavy into the PlayStation games. And thanks to her having one, I've been lucky enough to play a few games on PlayStation. I played The Last of Us, which blew my mind and may be my favorite game of all time. I haven't played the sequel yet. And I've played 2 of the Batman Arkham games, Arkham Asylum and Arkham Origins. And Arkham Origins is phenomenal. It's amazing. So, and I know that those aren't even the 2 best ones. Those are literally the 2 worst ones, probably, that I've played. So it's really I get the love for PlayStation. I understand where the fascination comes from. I just don't get that controller, man. Like I can't get used to X's and triangle. Every time I see a prompt for a button, I have to look at it and be like, where is that? I have to search for it. It's so alien to me every time I play it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anybody who's ever picked up a Nintendo 64 controller who doesn't miss those. I mean, Nintendo 64 controller with GoldenEye was just like, that trigger button was just there.
Yeah.
It was so perfect.
It was
just
perfect.
one hand, that thing. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's funny though, because I speak to people who sort of dig out their N64s or dig out, GoldenEye and other sort of the games of those era, and it's quite frightening when you revisit the classic games sometimes, because they are just not what they're sort of best left in the past. I think a lot of these games, because
I think the nostalgia plays into it though. Like I mean, I played GoldenEye recently just to kind of see if it still holds up, and it's a pretty rough game. It's a pretty rough game, but I had a blast because I was just taken back to my childhood. And I'm Puerto Rican, so I come from a very big family. We have a lot of cousins. Everybody, every generation, there's just kids everywhere. So when we have like family gatherings or anything like that, holidays, birthdays, anything like that, it would usually be at my house, because we had the bigger house. Everybody else lived in apartments and we lived in a house. So everybody was usually at our house, and once like the festivities of the family were all done, the kids all end up downstairs in the basement playing video games, and it was always GoldenEye. It was always the four squares, and there was always a queue for like who's up
Mhm.
next and like who's got winner, and oh my god, dude, like GoldenEye, the golden gun mode where
Mhm.
like you can one shot everybody. Oh my god, like we had battles, man. Like we threw down, like we tested our loyalty to our family. This like it was crazy.
Such a brilliant game. No, it was great, and I don't know. I mean, I love games like that, and I think there'll always be a place for games like that. But I think
Sure.
with the kind of with the role playing games, I remember the first time that somebody gave me Final Fantasy VII, which was the first one that I actually played, despite the fact that I've since ended up buying the whole back catalogue and everything kind of since. But it was just for me, it was just that point where a game went from being something that you could just kind of pick up, put down, play one level of. You know, of course, we'd all played the Sonics or Mario, you know, depending on where your allegiance was.
Sure.
And we played those platform games or you know, your Space Invader-y type games where you're moving up and you're shooting at stuff. But you were always removed from the character. You always knew that Sonic was Sonic, and you
Yeah.
were not him. You were just
You were
controlling.
controlling him. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Same
so
same
that,
with Link. The same is very true with Link and Zelda. It's just like it's always in the third person. You know, you're always looking down on your character. It's never a first person game, and
yeah,
therefore there is a bit of a separation there. The interesting thing about the way Zelda does it though is that Link is silent. And so it forces the player to think up dialogue for Link
yeah,
because he
sure.
never speaks, you know, and even when he's interacting with other characters, they might be reacting to him, but he's not doing anything. But it's all up here for the player.
Yeah.
So
And I
little
guess
touches like that make it interesting.
yeah, and I guess the extension of that now is going fully the other way. So now we see the major role-playing games where actually you've got a voice, and not only have you got a voice, you've got choices. So all
Yeah.
of a sudden now, where you were before creating that character maybe more in your mind, now you're actually feasibly, like tangibly creating that character on the screen with the choices that you make. And I think the role-playing video games have always had that element of choice because a lot of them are open world. Even 25, 30 years ago, they were still open world games. And
Yeah.
I think that's the bit that's all really tied back into, you know, that love of exploration and that love of new exciting worlds and landscapes that I think anybody who reads and probably ends up writing fantasy in some form, there's an inevitable kind of crossover there. And I guess that was kind of the bit that was resonating most for me in terms of this discussion today.
Yeah, my limited experience with that side of things, with especially with the video game world of RPGs, I guess the closest I ever got to is for a little while I played World of Warcraft, and that's about as as deep as I got into it because it you know it you're allowed to create your own character, make it look however you like, you know, the gear that you can get like switches up and the open world where I almost didn't even do missions when I played the game. I just wanted to explore the map
Yeah.
and go to all these different regions. Like at one point you're going through a jungle and before you know it there's dinosaurs and you're like, oh, there's dinosaurs in this area. Like this whole like country is this whole weird other, and then you go somewhere else and a griffin like flies overhead and you're like, where? It's just that kind of like immersion was huge for me. And again, this is the early days of video when World of Warcraft was, you know, the biggest thing in the world. And
Sure.
and I did not have a very powerful computer, so I was playing it with like crazy awful lag and just it, but I couldn't stop playing it. I had to like explore the map and explore the world and see what everything they had.
So let me ask you, I'm going to test a theory now then. So when it comes to books with you, let's say you've got a fantasy book you're going to read. Are you one of those guys that looks at a 700-page fantasy book and is just like, hells yeah, that I'm all about that? Or are you somebody that gets intimidated by an enormous book like that?
The only part of me that has some trepidation about diving into a bigger book like that is the fact that I know that I don't have a lot of time, and so like There will be big breaks in between reading chapters, and so when I pick up a book like that, I know that I'm going to be reading that for like the next 4 months, maybe.
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
going to be for a while. So that's really the only thing that holds me. Other than that, I'm just salivating. Like I want to dive in. Absolutely. The A Song of Ice and Fire books, Game of Thrones, and all of its sequels. I read them all the time. My bread and butter. Lord of the Rings. I read that stuff just to dive into that world. Like I love walking around those worlds.
And you the book that the work that you're putting together is going to be expansive.
It's pretty freaking big. I like to admit that I'm pretty much breaking every rule that they tell you not to break when you're doing your debut novel. They tell you don't write a giant epic. Mine is pretty epic. They always say don't have multiple main characters. I have at least 3 main characters. Like I just like don't mix too many genres. I'm like, what is genre? Everything. Throw it all in there. Like I just yeah, the bigger I can make the world, the more real that I can make it, the more history that I can give it. That's my crack cocaine, man. I just dive right into that.
So interestingly, and this is what I was interested to know that because you
had me pegged. You had me pegged.
Yeah, I figured I kind of knew where the answer was going. So my book, and one of the reasons I've been able to produce, well, basically 2 books and then a third one on the way, is that it's about 270 pages long. They're going to be around about 70,000 words each of the 3 books. So the total word count is shorter than the book that I'm reading now, the John Gwynne Malice. And just give this one another shout out because this is a heck of a book, but this is longer probably than my entire trilogy will be. And part of it with that is that I have quite a limited my reading attention span is not great. So I love getting stuck into big books, but I'm a bit of a skim reader. So I am somebody, I know there's a lot of people who pretty much just hone in on dialogue when they're reading, and I'm probably a little bit guilty for that. So what I found is that actually when we talk about role-playing video games and some of these huge expansive open world games, I actually find that I'm probably still, I get the most out of games that are maybe 10, 15, 20 years old, where maybe the worlds weren't so big, they weren't so expansive, because although they gave me those new different worlds, that the world map, the opportunity to walk off and find your own path, and the freedom and exploration, I'm somebody who needs a little bit of a linear narrative. So for example, I was speaking to someone the other day about the books that I've written, and I'd kind of describe them, and I hate to sort of like hang my hat on a very popular fantasy franchise, but I would say that my book is like, it's for people that have watched Game of Thrones but would never read it. That's kind of how I would describe it.
Okay.
It's got that kind of, it's got the intrigue, it's got the politics, it's got the kind of medieval type setting, it's got all that kind of stuff. But
you don't get bogged down in the blood orange at the feast. Like you don't give us all the details about the membrane and everything. Like that's not important.
Absolutely not. So like I'm all just thinking, I'm almost like coming straight in, almost like I've got the camera and I'm directing a movie or whatever, and I'm like, right, where's the action happening? But I reread Lord of the Rings at the start of the year, and there were patches when I was really kind of relying on my memory of the movies, because I found it is quite a tough book to read, especially the Tom Bombadil section, which is interesting since that isn't in the movies. So then you just off in your own.
It takes you right out. Yeah, it takes you right out. It's funny because I used to read Lord of the Rings before the movies came out, and I always enjoyed it. Obviously, with all the challenges that it comes, that it does really challenge the reader. But then after the movies, I had the same exact experience where now the Tom Bombadil section like sticks out like a sore thumb, and like I don't know what to do with it, and often I'll skip it because I feel that it takes me right out of the story, and I'm like, why are we even here? This doesn't come back. Why does this matter? It's just one of those things, and I know that there must be a reason that it matters. He wouldn't have put it in there if it didn't. But I have no idea why that section matters. I couldn't tell you.
Sure. It's a bit of a trip, that is, I have to say. Yeah. But, when I finished those books, and I've read some books that I've kind of like sped through, and I've got through really quickly. I've been reading a lot of sort of YA fantasy as well. And a lot of that stuff's very easy to read. But, I think when you do the groundwork that Tolkien did with his world building, the same as with these enormous open world games, you feel like you're really and truly there. And when I finished Lord of the Rings and I stepped away from those books, I felt like I missed Middle-earth, because that is what you do when you really flesh out that world, whether it's in a book, in a movie, in a video game. You know, you feel like you belong there for the period of time you're reading the books. And so I think I can't wait to read your 2,000-page epic you're going to put together. I'm sure I'll be wanting to move into whatever world you've created.
It's funny because George Martin, he points out that when Lord of the Rings, and even today, but when Lord of the Rings was just the books and they were huge and they were, everywhere, and the explosion of Lord of the Rings was happening, there was no posters on people's walls of Aragorn or Frodo or Sam or Gandalf. Nobody had posters of the characters. They had posters of the map.
Yeah.
It was all about the world that story inhabited. And George Martin, like, aspired to do the same, as we all know. Like, he looks up very much to Tolkien and has adopted a lot of his things and taken them to the next level, turning it up to 11, like that's what he does. So it's really, really interesting that there are those stories where they're just so, the worlds are so vast and epic that it's really about the map. It's about the world. It's about where you are and all the possibilities that place presents to you. I wanted to backtrack very quickly for a moment, because earlier when we were talking about the games that we like to play versus the books that we like to read and or write, we had a viewer in the comments throw this up. It's so interesting. This makes me think, as a fantasy writer, I always default to first POV, first person point of view. My favorite games were Final Fantasy and Skyrim.
Cool.
Which are both, as I understand them, games where you can create your own character and play, freely, wherever you want and do whatever you want, right?
Yeah. So I think, it's one of the interesting things. When I started writing, I didn't even know what point of view really was. I started writing based on how I'd read books. And so again, where I've been reading a lot of, young adult fantasy recently, a lot of that's written in first person. My book is written in a close third person. So you get a lot of the thought process, but I've got multiple point of view, and I just feel, I think I think you have to get it right. There's a right way of writing any story, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
I quite
the
like
story itself will dictate it.
It will. And what about you? Is yours? I'm guessing yours is a third person then.
Yeah, mine is. I guess it's called third person limited, I believe. So every chapter follows a different point of view. I have three main characters, but as you say, it's a third person. It's a very close third person where you have. You have the view of everything, but you are connected to this one character's point of view. You do hear their thoughts if they have thoughts that they're sharing on the topic. But there's also, like, and this is something that I get from George Martin from reading A Song of Ice and Fire, from reading those books. He does that too. Every chapter is a different point of view, and whatever character is the point of view of that chapter, the narrator, the third person narrator, takes on their characteristics.
Yeah.
So if a character walks in that our point of view character hates or thinks is a complete moron or whatever, the narrator also thinks that person is a complete moron and talks about them as though they are. And then in another chapter, you'll be in the head of somebody who actually loves that person and respects them and thinks that they're the greatest. And so when that person walks in, that's how the narrator talks about that person. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, where, like, the point of view character sort of infects the narrator a little bit, and but it's all through their perspective. Yeah.
Have you read Joe Abercrombie?
I'm sorry. Have I read what?
Have you read the author Joe Abercrombie?
No.
Okay, I'm going to give you a separate recommendation there, because he's I think very heavily influenced by George R.R. Martin, but his characterization is seriously good, and again, he does a brilliant job of you almost don't need to tag the character who's who's speaking, because from the tone of the way it's written. I'm a huge Joe Abercrombie fan, so I would definitely say that those two kind of go hand in hand. I think you'll really enjoy. And he was probably the biggest inspiration for my book, albeit mine is not as kind of probably not quite as grim and edgy as his work, and certainly isn't as skilled, but he definitely was the inspiration.
Yeah, the same here with George Martin. Like again, I've taken a lot from him, but I mean, I can't do what he does. Like I'm just a pretender to the throne. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to do.
you bring new bits in, and you take the bits you like, and that's where you get new things. But to the first point of view, I totally get it. I think when you write in first person perspective, you are right there with the character. And actually, one of the things that I've tried to do with my writing is, actually, it's really stupid. Sometimes when you're writing in third person, you don't fully live through what does that sort of walk down a corridor feel like, or what, because you feel a little bit detached, and you almost have to train your brain to think, if I was writing this in first person, what would that look like immediately from the character's eyes? And when you then flip the language around, and it's amazing how much more rich my writing has become from actually just training my brain to think first person and then back it up, because you can sometimes, your characters can just become sprites to get you through your story, when in real terms you get the best stuff when you are living those moments, no matter what perspective you're writing in. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, with the Skyrim, with Final Fantasy, those were the first time probably with games that I was those characters. Their plight really meant something to me, and you're talking really about your character's development, because I think that that's one of the key elements in role-playing video games, is that you see a character development, both in terms of their social development, but also their, you know, their physical, their attributes and things like that. And you can see that development happening on the screen in the same way that you do when you read a book or you watch a movie, and you see that arc, that hero's journey, or whatever that a character may be on. So I think from reading Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Philip Pullman, kind of his Dark Materials and stuff like that when I was younger, it got me thinking, what's the next step from that? And then when I connected with Final Fantasy and other games on from there, that's really where those two kind of just linked and went on from there. Link, it's a good pun.
Yeah. Link and Zelda. So man, there's a lot there. The chat was throwing up some love for Final Fantasy and Zelda as well, as we were talking about that. The pure exploration of value of Minecraft as well. It says building a Minecraft world is like world building for a book. Part is discovery and part is purposely designed. Man, that's really well said. And Lucy came back as well with believing that the closed third POV is most popular for fantasy. I find that too, because it's probably more of a balance of character relating to the reader and world building. Yeah, allowing it. I believe she's right. I think that it allows the reader to put themselves in the shoes of each character, and therefore have so many different perspectives and views of this world, and be able to look at it from so many different angles. You know, for a fantasy reader who loves, you know, big huge worlds, that's candy. You know, that's beautiful.
Yeah, just to that though as well, there's another interesting thing that you always, I mean, I think George R.R. Martin is a brilliant example of this. Is the other thing as well is, of course, if you choose first person, you are limited as to what you can actually do to your character. If you've got a third person, you can end a character. You know, especially if you've got multiple points of view. I mean, I'm sure there are books with first person where the character has, you know, died, or as something as bad happened to them for part of the story. But with third person, you get that ability, and obviously in the Game of Thrones, you know, there was that ability to just create characters, build them up to knock them down, basically, and that to me is exciting. And I think that video games, and there are some, you know, again, I'm going to keep harping on Final Fantasy, but I know if anyone who played Final Fantasy VII, excuse the spoilers, but, you know, that was a game that for the first time took a main character at the end of the first of 3 discs and killed the main character, you know, just literally made you invest time in building a character up and then killed that character. Whoa. And, you know, that to me, again, was just a point where you just go, wow. And people still talk about that as one of the key points of that game. You know, can you, like, that moment when you lose a character that you've invested in?
The sheer balls of doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's actually quite easy to do that in your writing. And then afterwards, it's only when you've written it that you then have to deal with the consequences of what you've just done, because all of a sudden you haven't got that character anymore. And that's in writing. That's an interesting lesson.
Tomi Adeyemi wrote Children of Blood and Bone,
Hmm.
and she has multiple point of view characters, but it's written in the first person. So
Yeah.
each chapter, you are that particular character. I haven't finished that book yet, but I'm looking forward to some heads getting chopped off later on, and
Yeah,
you know, like
it's good. It's really good, and I think it was just you know, one of a number of really great books that have come out that have kind of just put a new perspective on fantasy, you know, a new setting. You know, I think
yeah,
we take things we like about fantasy and we apply it to new worlds, whether those are crossover worlds or, you know, the kind of the Harry Potter kind of way of doing things, or whether it's a straight out a new world, or and if that, and I think most of the times when we're building a world that it's probably based on something we've seen before or somewhere we've been. Culturally, you need to have something to kind of pin it to. You know, it's a bit like this place, or the people are a bit like these people. So it's great to see the aesthetics of fantasy so broad now. I think it's really exciting.
yeah, I agree. There's a lot of fresh stuff being done in fantasy. That's another thing that I'm trying to do with my book. You know, the setting is a sci-fi fantasy world where you know, the first book primarily takes place in a very sci-fi setting with lots of technology and all that kind of stuff. But there is another world as well, and once we go to that one, you're gonna have fantasy creatures and magic and all kinds of crazy stuff happening over
Awesome.
there. And so this kind of clash of these two worlds is part of where I'm going with it. Um, just to like bring something new to and the first book is a murder mystery set in that world, so it's not
Oh,
even
awesome.
it's all disguised as something else, and as you peel back the layers of the world, it'll get more and more open. And that's something, number one, that I got from not just George Martin but other fantasy writers. I read a lot of Neil Gaiman as well. He might be my favorite writer of all time. And the other big influence for me was the writer's room of Breaking Bad. I learned
Hmm.
a lot about writing characters, changing characters, about the evolution of who they are, as these choices bring consequences. And one of the big lessons from that writer room is this mantra they had of "Where's Walt's head at?" or "Where's their character name here's head at?" Whereas like they're writing and they get to a situation, they don't know what to do next, they don't know where to go, and they're stuck. And so they always go back to, well, where's Walt's head at? What just happened to him? What's
Hmm.
weighing heavily on his mind? What trauma have we already inflicted on him that we can pull from? What, you know, artifacts have been dropped around him that we can pick up and do something with? Like, if you figure out where he's been, you can figure out how he feels about where he's been, and that's going to tell you what choice he's going to make moving forward. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah, sure.
that kind of thing is paramount to writing, you know, full layered characters. You know, this idea of who they were, what has happened to them, how it's changed them, where they're going. You know,
Yeah.
and
Well, I think
in an RPG like that, the possibilities are endless with where you're going.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think yeah. I mean, that's the thing, really. You when you get to connect with a character, it's often. I mean, it can be done over hundreds and hundreds of pages, but it's often just about, you know, what is their tension, what is their driving force, what do they stand to gain, what do they stand to lose, and once you've got that, and you can normally relate to that quite quickly, and
Hmm.
then yeah, then it's just about how you deliver that information, but. Sure. I mean, I'm with you. The more I read about writing, the more I learn. There's just so much out there, isn't there? And so many ways to do things, so many ways to stage a story. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, on the kind of the RPG side of things, I think the interesting thing there is that you've got a story that's playing out in front of you, but instead of the story being a linear one where it's delivered across the page, they have to stage that story in a way where you've got freedom to go around and influence things. You can speed it up, slow it down, depending on whether you want to go and explore the world, whether you want to go and speak to this character that gives you the bit of information that you need to move on. And I find that so fascinating how in fact, you've got characters there that wouldn't be on the page. You know, they're off page. They're characters you can wander off to and speak to, and then come back to the main, you know, story arc. And I find that just fascinating. And I think it's obviously that connection And if people are playing stories through video games now, that's also, you know, a great use of people's time, as long as they're engaging and understanding, learning about people, learning about other people through their characters. Virtually every game now is a role-playing game. You know, things like Grand Theft Auto gives you the power to take on your character. It doesn't have to be, you know, Middle-earth. It can be a city that we know, or a city like one we know, and you're still given the ability to go and mold that character. And it's the same with any video game virtually now.
Yeah. See, I've been waiting for like the next big World of Warcraft kind of thing. You know, like I want something that where the graphics today are so insane, you know, that I would just love to dive into a whole new world that I've never played in before like that. There's this game, I don't know if you've heard of it, called No Man's Sky. It's it's this crazy game where these programmers took the laws of our universe, the things that make matter and the things that created the Big Bang and everything. They put all of these laws into a generator. You know, they adjusted a few things here and there, and then they hit the button, and literally a digital Big Bang occurred, and a universe was created at random in this, you know, emulator. And so the whole point of the game is exploration, and you can travel through the universe to different solar systems, different planets, different moons, whatever, and they've developed in their own way based on whatever, you know, components they're made of in whatever area they are. And the wildlife is unique for every planet, and maybe civilizations have sprouted and died in the time that it took somebody to discover this planet. And as you're playing the game, if you go to a planet that nobody's been to, you can name it and everything in it. Like, you're the explorer that discovered this solar system and this planet before anybody else playing this game. So cool. You know? And we all share this one crazy universe and explore it together. And they keep adding upgrades and updates to the game, where like now there's like combat, you know, in your spaceships, you have weapons on it now, and like so now there's wars going on in there and all kinds of stuff. It's really interesting how you can create a world and just let people go, like let people loose into it. You know, last week I was on Glory Writes the Blues YouTube channel, and we were talking about Guardians of the Galaxy and how that movie relates to tabletop role-playing games. And, you know, the dungeon master or the game master creating this sort of story as he goes, and creating these scenarios for the gamers to make choices. And when, you know, I've never played those games, and they were explaining them to me and the rules and the different things that one can do. And I found it very interesting that it's not just like, for example, those old Goosebumps books where you could choose at the end of the chapter to go left or to go right. It's not that simple. It's, you know, like sometimes the game master has to like stop the game, put up a wall, and like roll some dice for a while and figure out like possibilities, because his player just came up with something that he didn't account for, and it's changed everything, and now he has to come up with a whole new storyline. That fascinates me, and I can't wait to dive into like that whole like tabletop role-playing world. But I find that that's the beauty of like stories and books and games, is like diving into a world you've never been in and then just running around and doing whatever you want in it.
Yeah,
even in a book.
Well, and when you're writing, you're actively doing that. Your character is basically saying, "I'm going to go here," because you've established a personality for them, and then you as the you know, the orator or the dungeon master or whatever it's going to be, you're saying, "No, you can't do that because this other character is going to do this," and that's really that is exciting, you know. And that was one of the things. It's interesting as you were speaking. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be about 20 years before you finish your epic book, given the scale of the thing. But, you know, for me, coming to my sequel, it was so much easier to write it, because like all of a sudden you've got all that groundwork's there. I already know who these characters are. I already know where they're going, what they want to do. So I reckon, you know, take your time on this one, and then you'll just churn out that sequel just like that. I can feel it. You know, that second book's coming easy.
I've got the trilogy at least loosely plotted, outlined. I have the trilogy outlined, and I've finished the very rough first draft of this first one. I use the word finished very loosely because it's okay. My original projection for the word count was 190,000. And when I did the math and fell on that number, it really scared me. And I had to I had to stop and okay, how big are like books in my genre? And I went and I did my research. And for example, you know, on the low side, you have books like yours or smaller, even 50,000 words. You know, a book that you can read on an airplane, you know, and be done by the time you land. And then there's on the opposite side of the spectrum, there's George Martin with the biggest books in the genre, and his smallest of the series, Game of Thrones, is upwards of 400,000 words, 430, I believe, if I remember the number correctly. So when I saw that number, I said, okay, so I'm pretty square in the middle at like 200K. I am not the biggest book ever written. I am definitely bigger than something that you can read on an airplane. I think I'm comfortable with that. But that number scared me further when I found out how much editing costs. And you're very lucky that your wife is your editor. And I wanted to talk to you about that a little later. We'll come back to that. But when I saw the cost, the average cost of editors, I said, I have to shorten this book. Because if I'm self-publishing, I have to come up with all this money myself. And this just seems insurmountable to me. So so I scaled it back to 100,000. I took out entire plans for chapters that I had and just redistributed those storylines into other chapters. I shortened my cast from like 7 point of view characters down to 3. Like I just did a whole bunch of stuff where I was like, let me cut all that stuff out. And so I've finished the first draft of 100K, but a lot of those chapters are pretty bare. They're rough chapters where I was just trying to get to the word count, get it down, get the story finished, but there's just so much more that I want to put in there and fill it out. And so my second draft is probably going to be closer to my original, you know, it's probably going to be like 150 at least.
That's
and
cute.
I'm just going to have to deal with it. But I want to have it out by December. So I'm working hard on it. And then hopefully I can get one of these out every 2 years. Because if I do get it out by December, that's a 2-year process that it took me for this book. I can live with that. Yeah, I can live with that.
Well, you don't want to. It's difficult because I mean, there's a whole other conversation on, you know, independent, self-published, whatever you want to call it. It's a costly business, no matter how you look at it. I mean, I can't say that my wedding was cheap. So yeah, I mean, I pay for my editing fees one way or another, you know, with my wife being the one who's doing it. But you know, I'm very fortunate there. But you know, you cover design work, even just the cost of your time and investment in it. It's obviously it's something you only do it because you want to do it, but it's a huge investment. And it's the more I get involved in the community of independent, you know, writers, it's you just know there's some brilliant ideas out there. And I'd hate to think that your book, it doesn't achieve what it could do. And when I say achieve, I mean on the page rather than selling millions of copies, because that's really not that important.
Yeah, it's writing the best story possible. And if you have this possible story that you would love to write, but you're having to cut back because of these other factors that have nothing to do with storytelling, that does kind of break my heart a little bit. I hear you, man.
But maybe you'll just have to do a Tolkien and just release loads of like separate books and texts that flesh out your world, and maybe just like publish them way later on in life.
All right, so here's what I'm doing. When I finished my first draft, you know, it's recommended that you take some time away from it, let it sort of ferment a little while before you come back and tackle the second draft. So I haven't gone back to the second draft yet. I've been done with it for 3 weeks now, and I've been using that time to write short stories in that world, but like throughout its history, so that I can put out some short story collections in between each book to sort of bring in readers and get them psyched up for the big book, you know. Now, along that same thought, we had this comment earlier that says, I write mostly third, but also dared to write a book with 11 separate first-person POVs. I felt schizophrenic by the end, and on the rewrite, I dropped all but 2 and the rest was third person. So, you know, and that's a perfect example of doing it for the story. She didn't do that because, or he, I'm sorry, I'm assuming that this is a female person, and I shouldn't assume. I don't know that. This person had 11 separate first-person POVs, but
Wow.
to have a better story, cut it down to the 2 POVs, and the rest was third person. That's really interesting. The switch back and forth has me curious about that book, because one of the things that I wanted to do in my book was I wanted to, since I have third person narrative throughout, I wanted to switch to first person for the 3 chapters where we were in the serial killer's point of view. I wanted to put
Who's the serial
reader.
killer?
Yeah, there's a serial killer. Of course, there's a serial killer. I wanted to put the reader in the mind of this, you know, quote unquote psycho, and I thought it would be really cool to, like, you know, switch to that perspective and feel all of a sudden, you know, sort of uncomfortable with how close you're reading the story. But I don't typically read a lot of first person stuff. I find that it takes me out of the story to read in first person. All the I's and the me's and it throws me off. So I don't feel that I wrote those chapters very well, and I switched back. So now the whole book is back to third person. I don't know if I'll try again in the second draft, maybe do it a little better, but the switching back and forth just didn't work for me. So I'm very curious how it worked for this.
Yeah, I think that's unbelievable. I hadn't even, dared is the word. I mean, it's that's a big project. But no,
Yeah.
I actually, interestingly, with my editing, it was interesting how evident it was as to how much of a sort of lazy reader I am, because I'm probably one of the minority where my word count increased about 10% in my edits. So yeah, I had a very lean book, which was really, you know, and this is the beauty of editing. You know, just the question of, well, you know, what was he thinking? What was, you know, what was their reason they did that, rather than just because you wanted the story to do that. And it was all those kind of questions that were asked of me, again, you know, that was just so important in the editing process. But yeah, I think I'm a bit of an anomaly in that mine was about adding words rather than reducing words. And it's really been amazing when I have people sort of say, oh, I absolutely loved this character, or I was totally rooting for this character. And I do know that only really came through because of that personality that was added in the edit. So again, you know, it's a tough balance with yours about keeping it on track, but trying not to lose too much of the personality of the characters and the story. So I wish you the best of luck with that. Like I say, I know an editor, so we can talk.
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll definitely talk. We have some rapid fire questions here. First up, how do you feel about sci-fi fantasy blended stories? I'll answer mine real quickly. I love it. I live for it. My book is one, and if you like that kind of stuff, stay tuned for my story. Nice. What about you, Tom?
So actually, I have to say that I have always typically tended to favor what in my mind is my sort of traditional fantasy, which is kind of more of a old world setting. Sure. You know, my book doesn't actually have any magic. It feels, I guess, kind of, someone said the other day, almost like a sort of an Arthurian tale, or a sort of a myth or a legend, something like that.
That's the vibe I got from the cover.
Yeah, because I didn't, you know, and I think it's unbelievable, these dystopian worlds or sci-fi and technology and stuff, but that wasn't in my story. So I've played some role-playing games, some RPGs that have kind of more of a sci-fi feel to them, things like Star Ocean and stuff like that, and other games that have got more of a spacey vibe to them. But I tend to veer more towards swords and shields and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I love to read that stuff for sure. I'm not the best at necessarily writing that stuff, so I tend to stick more towards the sci-fi fantasy stuff. The reason that I like that, I'm not a huge Star Wars nerd. I like, you know, Star Wars for what it is, but one of the big lessons that I learned from Star Wars was this sort of like hybrid of sci-fi fantasy and how to balance between the two, because yeah, you have spaceships and laser swords, but you also have these wizards that can move things with their mind. Like there's
Sure.
magic there as well. And so this sort of like half and half to the world is kind of what I play with in my book. You know, one of our main characters is the detective working the case. And so she's very scientifically oriented and minded. She has a lot of gadgets and technology that helps her do her job. And so you're getting a lot of that through it. And then one of my other characters is Faye, who is a this kind of hippie, you know, psychedelic drug using, you know, witchy kind of character. You know, she'll give you a tarot reading, but she might also put a curse on you. Like she's just kind of like everywhere like that. And so she has a certain magic to her as well. So like I like playing with the two sides of it. And when you put those two characters in a room, it's some of my best writing. Like when those two characters are talking to each other, I myself have to stop and be like, whoa, like these two are like getting into it. It's getting kind of heated.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so it's, yeah, I'm all about that kind of stuff. And I say, if you can do it well, do it. And if you're not doing it well, keep trying until you can figure it out, I guess, because there's all kinds of stuff to do in there. Let's see. How do you feel about maybe your series being turned into one of these RPG games? Do you see a possibility of that? Is it written in a way where that is possible, or would you write books that could be turned into RPGs? What do you feel about this?
Oh, it's an interesting one, because I noticed, actually, I was going to say earlier, I think I believe I saw a little while ago that some publishing sort of games publisher had brought George R.R. Martin in for one of the games they were working on, and I guess obviously we see with the last series of Game of Thrones, the TV show, that when you go off track from George R.R. Martin's writing, it tends to fall off a cliff a little bit. So I think it's really good that there seems to be an acceptance now that although there are some great writers for screen and for video games out there, actually the best writers are typically those that are still popping stuff down on the page, and that's why we see so many books being bought up for TV shows. We've just seen Shadow and Bone recently come on, you know, the Lee Bardugo series. No matter where you stand on that, it's great to see another book going to TV. Mine's my book is definitely full of twists and turns. It's so I think it would be quite difficult to adapt mine. It would be great to think that someone's waiting there with a big checkbook about to write me something out, but I don't think mine would necessarily work. I think mine's a book, and that's what it was meant to be.
It's a little more closed into the story there. Right on. Here's a good one. It says, I think I am worried about head hopping if there are too many POVs. Any tips on how to avoid this? I think I'll go first and then kick it over to you, Tom. My book, again, has 3 main characters. I originally had another 4 supporting characters that would have their own chapters. I've cut out the plans for those chapters, but having repurposed them, like there is the occasional chapter that goes into a secondary character's point of view because one of my main characters is incapacitated or whatever it might be. You get to hop into the point of view of somebody else who's there in this, you know, chapter until I can get my main character back. And then when I do that, I switch back in the following chapter. If you're worried about head hopping, which I was, number one, making each character as unique as possible against the others is key, I think. If, like you said earlier, if you can tell who's speaking without the writer naming the character to let you know who's speaking, if you can tell who's speaking, that means that character is easily recognizable and unique within the pages of this book. And if you do that for as many characters as possible, then you shouldn't have any trouble with the head hopping thing. Everybody's always going to know where they are. There's also easy solutions to this. George Martin does it, and I stole it from him. At the top of every chapter, the name of the chapter is the name of the character. You know, like if a lot of people choose to title their chapters, I choose to name the character that the chapter is focusing on. So that's another really easy way. If you turn a page and it says real big at the top the name of a character, there's absolutely no way that you can be confused as to where you are. Just keep the number, I would say, to a manageable amount. Again, like they always tell first timers, don't write a huge epic with 11 point of view characters. And so like you know, just keep it reasonable. What about you? What do you think, Tom?
So so again, I think one of the key things with my book is twists and turns and surprises, and I think that those are most easily achieved through the way that I did it. So I definitely was kind of economical and smart with my choices, which is that I have really only a small number of, well, 2 basic point of views, and although I'm very careful not to withhold information from the reader, it obviously means that I only see and you only know what those characters know. So I don't hop out of those into any other characters. It's just those 2. So that means it restricts the information, and it makes being blindsided a little bit easier to do. I was debating with my wife the other day about how you have twists and turns when you don't have such a close relationship with just 1 or 2 characters, and it's apparent to me that you then have to regulate the information and be very, very clever with whose perspective you choose, and it becomes more and more complicated. But coming back to the author, Joe Abercrombie, who I mentioned earlier, he will, within chapters, hop between people's heads. And one of his for me, his biggest successes, he has a book called The Heroes, which is a spin-off book of his first trilogy. And the whole book is effectively a battle. Pretty much the entire book is a battle. And he has one giant battle, and it is masterful. It's incredible.
Wow.
But he has one particular chapter, which anyone who's read Joe Abercrombie will know. It's a battle where you pick up with a character, and that character will run within this battle, and they will go and kill, maim, do whatever they do, and they will ultimately then die. And then it picks straight up from the person who's just killed them. They run off. They go and do their thing. They will then die. And you get and within literally sometimes half a page, you'll get the information that you need to know about why that person's there. It's brilliantly done. He's there because he wants to make right something that happened in his past, whatever. You get this flow of information. The next thing you know, his head's gone. And then you see from the perspective of the person who just lopped someone's head off, and then off they go. And it is brilliant. I mean, and that is
blowing my mind right now. What book is this again? Joe Abercrombie?
It's called The Heroes. Yeah, and his name's Joe Abercrombie. I think it's just essential reading for anyone who's read George R.R. Martin. I think there's always a question that it's heavily influenced by Game of Thrones, but I think you'll love it. I really do. But The Heroes, you'll probably have to have read the core series first, but that chapter, even if you just find that chapter, it is a brilliant example of, if you give enough information, you can care about a character and then see them die in half a page.
Did I write that right? Is this what it looks like for people at home? All right, so everybody can find it and check that out. I am gonna hop on that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Oh man, I see the George Martin connection there, because one of my favorite sequences to read was in the second book, A Clash of Kings. There's the big battle of the Blackwater Bay, and it's got so many point of view characters converging in this one big battle. You have Davos on Stannis' side. You have Tyrion, Cersei, and one of the Stark girls as well was in there, and you're hopping from chapter to chapter, from point of view to point of view, but it's one big battle. And so you're outside with Tyrion, and then you hop inside with Cersei and Sansa. That's what it was, Cersei and Sansa. And then you go back out, and you're across the bay with Davos, and then you're back with Tyrion. Oh my God, like that battle is incredible. It's one of my favorite sequences in any book. So that sounds right.
You don't know, and you just don't know who you should be supporting, who you should not be supporting, who you like. Because while you're in those characters' brains, you think that everything they're doing is right, or at least it's justifiable. It's that kind of
Tyrion is defending his home. Davos is trying to win the war for his king. Stannis, an underrated character in my opinion. That dude cracks me up. He's so serious that he's hilarious. I love that character so much. Man, like that's that masterful writing that just like changes how you write. You know what I mean? Like that stuff, and you're like, wow.
And you've just led me onto something. If you don't mind me just throwing a question at you.
So yes, please.
With your writing, have you, you know, I think one of the interesting things with games, books, whatever, and we talk about all the things that are going on in the world at the moment, there's almost a bit of a feeling that your work should have a message or a theme. Did you feel in yours that you do you think you have one now? Do you think that you had one at the start? Tell me about that, because I think that's interesting for everyone who's written anything, is when that crops up.
Okay, so there was a little bit of lag on my side over here, so forgive me. What is it that creeps up on us?
A theme, the
Okay.
message of your work, because obviously with something like Game of Thrones, it's quite grey. You know, there's good and bad, and I think that is a bit of a theme anyway. Is, you know, good and bad are not quite as clear cut as you might think. But there's themes. So what about you?
So with me, all right, I find it best to not necessarily set out to write any particular theme or point in your story and find it as you go. You know, for me, it's about the plot and the characters and the choices that they're making and the situations that you put them in. And the theme sort of kind of presents itself. For me, for this book, it happened when I was letting a few people read some of my early chapters, and I sent the first like 6 chapters to my best friend. I've known him since 2nd grade, and he's one of the most intelligent people that I know. And so I sent it to him, and he read it, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I really like, you know, the themes of like nature versus science, and you know, magic versus technology. Like those two sides of your story are really cool." And I was like, I had no idea I was doing that, but that makes absolute sense, because I have one point of view character that's magic based and one that's science based, and I have one that's sort of going to be trapped between the two of them and having to explore both of their worlds. So absolutely, like, that makes perfect sense, and I'm gonna roll with that from here on out. Like, once you find it, it's perfectly okay to then delve into it and enrich in it and you know, really hammer it home, as they say. But yeah, I don't specifically set out with a theme in mind necessarily. I just sort of find it as I go. How about you?
Well, it's interesting. I read one of the books that I read when I was sort of starting to want to read more about writing. I read the Philip Pullman book on writing. You know, I'd loved his Dark Materials, Northern Lights, no matter however you'd call it. Loved those books, and it was really interesting to read, you know, his thoughts on the books. And he kind of said that he never really gives an opinion on what the theme of the book is, because that's a personal thing, and that actually, you're right, it comes from every reader will see maybe a different theme or a different message, and he refrains from commenting on what it is, because he feels that there's almost sort of like a given that if the author says that's the theme, then that's the top answer, basically, and he doesn't believe that you should have a top answer. But I'm the same. I didn't. It just, in the end, it just played out that my characters delivered a message, and when it was coming towards the back end of the book and everything was tying off, and you're thinking in, you know, educational terms, you're doing your conclusion at the end, and you're sort of trying to wrap it up into something. It just wrapped up into, you know, just a story, really very much. But my book is very much a hero's journey. It is about identity. It is about, you know, self-worth. It is a young main protagonist, so you're always going to have those challenges that, fortunately, anyone who's reading the book likely has been through, and we've all been through that bit where we don't really know who we are. And for me, my main character, which also helped with my world building massively, is a storyteller. So I have the ability to deliver stories about the world through that character, which is great. But
you pulled a Stephen King. Well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Always to be mentioned in the same breath. And he definitely, he's a storyteller, and there's somebody who is just wrapped up in telling other people's stories and is just basically itching to have one of his own. And so that in the end just set me up really to have that story. And yeah, I mean, I think in the end it all just became. It made a lot of sense. I remember getting to the end and thinking, "Thank God I made him a storyteller. This was a genius move. I just needed him to portray it at the start."
Yeah, but you didn't plan it, but like it worked out. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Bard characters similarly, you know, give you that where they can sing songs that tell stories. You know, about the world and the history and whatnot. So like, yeah, I have fun playing with like how to present the history of the world to the reader. in different ways, whether it's in the head of the point of view character, or if it's, you know, the graffiti on the wall over the mural or whatever it is, you know, like there's just so much rich possibility there. Let me see here. Kent finally showed up. What's up, Kent? Welcome. He says sometimes it feels like all themes boil down to the balance between order and chaos. Then you layer a controlling idea on top of that. Yeah, interesting. You know, once my themes started presenting themselves, like I said, I sort of ran with them, but you still at the end have to sort of tie it all together and put a nice little button on it. So it definitely helps to look at it from those two sides, you know.
I think I mentioned it actually in an authors group that we're both part of, Adrian. But for me, one of the really interesting things, and this is just kind of like real basics. For you guys in the US, I hope it's on your Netflix as well. There's a great show called Myths and Monsters on Netflix, which basically is just a wonderful, particularly the first episode, but all of the episodes really. It talks very much through how so many of these classic stories that we know, Star Wars included, really boil down to a story or a sequence of different stories that have been repurposed throughout time in different ways. And I think that's really fascinating because, again, it does challenge anyone who's writing to say, okay, well, I accept that I'm not the first person who's ever written this story arc, but how can I take it onto it and add to it and make something unique? But I think for anyone who's interested in writing, I think that's particularly a fantasy work, I would say that is definitely a show that's worth watching if you have it on Netflix.
So to tie it all together, how do you feel your time with RPGs has affected your writing? What lessons did you ultimately like really draw from those stories in those games to bring to yours?
Typically with RPGs, you have a cast of characters. The relationships between those characters are really important, and I think that you have to have those in. I mean, sometimes it's a lonely story, but I think in a lot of books you have to have those characters, and like you say, those moments where when those two characters are together, it's fire. Whether it's a romance plot, whether it's fun, whether it's a father and son, and it's about them not meeting their expectations, whatever it's going to be, throwing characters together is what makes it exciting. And I think, you know, the world map, even when it's just a small pixelated map, you look at this splodge of green with a few little trees and you imagine that you're walking across this verdant plain towards this thick wood where who knows what will lie in there. Well, you know, it was just a bunch of pixels, but you learn to use your imagination and to imagine the whole journey and then to choose, you know, which bits of it you want to put into your writing. And I think that just as well with an RPG, you walk into a town or a village, and instead of seeing the flat, you're able to walk through doors and see what the insides of these houses look like. And all of that adds to your feeling for the difference between this town and the next town, this village and the next village. So I think whenever I write now, I try to go through those doors if I can and see how I can pick up on those little details. And even though I'm quite concise with my writing, I think, what little details will tell people straight away, this is what this looks like. And I think that those are the key things I'd take away. But interestingly now, you know, I find more and more that I started off with books, Lord of the Rings and the like, and I wanted games that played out like Lord of the Rings. And I played games and I played games. And now maybe it's just age, sad as it is, I've come back around to books again. So it's interesting how that goes.
Nothing sad about coming back to books, brother.
No, I find it very difficult to now find. I look at a 50, 60, 100-hour long video game and I think to myself, man, that seems like a lot of hard work. And yet I have no idea how many hours I've racked up reading this week. So it's always hard to strike a balance.
Yeah, I struggle with that same balance myself. Again, I'm addicted to Zelda games, and I have to like force myself not to play them and instead go and do my writing that I have to do. You know, like I have to treat it more of a reward. I might be able to play 20, 30 minutes tops after I've done all my writing, you know. because when that game came out, I put hours and hours and hours into it. And I'm a father. I'm a husband. I have responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I was playing Zelda like I was, and there's a sequel coming out, and my wife is already like, "Don't you?" I'm like, "I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna buy it, and it's gonna happen all over again. You're not gonna see me for like weeks. Like that's just what's gonna happen, you know." Like, but man, like the exploration of these worlds, you know, you were talking about being able to like walk up to a house in this game, open the door, and actually walk into that house and see it. You know, in the older Zelda games, the 3D ones like Ocarina of Time and all that, you would walk up to a house, you would open the door, and the screen would go to black, and it would take a second to load,
Yeah.
and then it would come up, and you would be inside the house, and you're trapped inside this three-dimensional space of the house, and you explore it, and then you leave, and the lights go out again, and you have to wait another 20 seconds, and then it comes back up, and there was always that sort of like divide there, and then Breath of the Wild comes along, and you can walk across the entire map from the bottom left corner to the top right corner and never hit a loading screen.
Yeah.
You can walk into every house along the way and never hit a loading screen. You open the door and you're in there. You can see it. You can look through the windows and see the inside of the houses. It's all so incredibly immersive and real that you can explore every nook and cranny without ever being taken out of it, without ever having to experience one of those load screens that reminds you that you're playing a game. One of the really fun things about playing that game for me was usually I was playing at night when the whole rest of my family was asleep. Everybody's in bed, the house is dark, I'm trying to be quiet, right? So I have headphones on. And all the lights are off in the house because if I turn on any light, my wife is going to wake up. So I have all the lights off. The only thing on is the TV. And so there's this giant screen in front of me encompassing all of my view. There's nothing else in the world. Everything else is dark. I have my headphones on. And Breath of the Wild, you've played it, it doesn't do a lot with music like most Zelda games does.
Yeah.
Instead, it does ambiance. There's birds chirping in the distance, and you can hear that there might be a boar in the trees over there, and somewhere there's a giant monster sleeping, and you can hear him snoring, and the wind is blowing through, and you can see it move the grass, and like it just immerses you in that world. And man, like that's what I strive to do with my books. Like, Kent Sean, who posted in the chat earlier, gave me a huge compliment when he read one of my chapters where he said that he felt like he was in the car with these two characters as they were talking to each other. He's in the back seat watching them talk to each other in the front seat. And I'm like, that's what I wanted to happen. Like that's exactly, I want you to feel like you're in that car and you're watching these two characters argue or whatever's happening, and I want you to feel the tension. And there's flashing lights behind us, and you look back. Like I want that to be your world when you're reading the book. And I get that from video games, from these role-playing games that I've played. Like the idea of you're in this world, explore it.
Well, I think it's tough. You've just touched on it there. At the end of the day, that when you walk into your house, or at the moment, we don't leave our house that much still here. I don't know about where you are, but you walk into the room. The latest games console is calling to you. Netflix is calling to you. It's a tough time for writers now. You have really got to create something that says to somebody, put that controller down, switch the TV off. This is going to grab your attention, and this is going to it's going to give you all that visual, but it's going to maybe let you grow it as well in your mind's eye. It's going to let you be the director and whatever, and I think there is a pressure in that, and there is a pressure to write something that's very quick and snappy and binge worthy, because that's what TV is and games have become. So yeah, it's a tough time, I think, but fortunately
that's an interesting point. I don't mean to cut you off, but that's a very interesting point because, yes, TV and social media and everything has made everything very like click past and like my attention span is gone or whatever. But at the same time, we're in a golden age of television right now where they're making, what used to be film level storytelling and quality of production that you would have to go out to the theater for. You would have to plan in advance. You would have to get a babysitter for the kids. You'd have to buy tickets. You'd have to stand in line. You'd have to get your popcorn. It was a whole thing, and it was an event. And people, I can't remember the last time I was in a movie theater. It's been so long for me.
Yeah.
And I miss it very, very much. But I live in a world where I can turn on Disney Plus and watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I'm watching a Marvel movie on television every week.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's incredible what they're doing on television these days.
Yeah.
So that's our competition, as you say. You know, like, to get people to put that away and pick up a book instead, better be a damn good book, man. Because
Yeah.
my list on Netflix is never ending. I'm always adding stuff to it. I'm hardly ever taking anything away because I've watched it. Like, it keeps growing. There's so much to watch, so much to read. I mean, go through Amazon and scroll through all the books on there. You know.
Well, that's the thing, and I won't keep you talking, you know, all the way through the day. But you know, one of the things I still love though is that I think you obviously you see people talking about TV, and I guess we're missing, you know, here we've not been in the office and stuff. And normally when you're in the office, you get people talking about what they've watched on TV. You still don't see people talk about the TV shows that they love with the same passion that they do when they've read a good book. When somebody's read a book and they really love it, you can't stop them from talking about how much they love it. And they talk, so they almost want to buy you that book because they want you to read it. So I think there is still something there. And I think it's because it is a personal journey. A TV show that's always going to be delivered through the director's eyes or whatever, you know, the script writer's eyes. The book, it's you're still part of that process, I think. And I still think that goes a long way. But you're right, it does still need to be a pretty good book. So thank God we've written one. Hey, that's the good news.
Very, very well said. Thank God we wrote some good books.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have 2 books out now, is that right? Or just the
no?
one
So the first one is written. The second one, it's about to become fierce here. We're in the edit stage for the second one here. So
nice.
the house is balanced on a knife edge most of the time. And then writing the third one at the moment, just to kind of get ahead of myself a little bit. But I'm hoping to get the second one out by October this year. I want to be quite quick because they are quite short books, and I think I want people to still kind of remember what they read and go on to the next one. And I'm capable of doing it because of how short they are. And then I'll get the third one out, I think, probably early summer or sort of late spring next year, and have the whole series done in about a year, because it's only going to be probably 800 pages all told by that point. So
right on.
But yeah, so
good size book.
Let's see how we go. As honestly and truly, it still amazes me whenever I get a message from somebody who's reading it that I didn't literally deliver to their front door, and they say they enjoy it. Honestly, if only one person reads it, it's a success. And I've been amazed to see so many people kind of message me, "Oh my Lord, I never imagined that was going to happen," or "I can't believe this happened to this character." It's great. So I've loved it. It's already achieved everything I wanted it to do.
I look forward to that experience as well, my friend. And I had a wonderful writer by the name of Nina Moreno on my channel recently, and we got into talking about like your fan base. Like, you start realizing the kind of people that read your books and enjoy them and love them and are waiting for the next one. It's not always who you think it's gonna be. So that's always gonna be like really fun to like find like who your core audience is. That's really interesting. You mentioned that you're in the editing phase with your second book, so that's beautiful. It brings us right back to, I wanted to touch on that, being edited again by your wife. So your wife is a professional editor, and then this is your first time, with your first book, it was your first time stepping into the role of an author. And as you mentioned, you didn't realize that you didn't know how to write until she got into it with the red pen. I love to throw in there always that it's only going to make your writing better to go to a professional editor and to get it torn apart with that red pen. A lot of people dread it, but I'm like, they want to make your book better. They're telling you how to tell the story better. They're not telling you to tell a different story. They're telling you how to tell this story better. So it's all good. But how was that experience for you the first time that you got something back from your wife and it was covered in red ink? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, well, I mean, she has she has all the creative writing qualifications. She knows this stuff, and she's also very thick-skinned because I understand that people go through that. I used to, speaking to people about their work, getting critique and critiquing others. It's a really healthy habit to have when it's done constructively, which it is. When you're writing something for the first time and you don't consider yourself to be a writer, and you're kind of nervous about everything you write on the page, and the more personality you add to it, the more exposed you feel. And then someone says, well, why would they say this? Or that's you go, I don't know, whatever it may be, I don't really understand that or whatever. And it's just quite uncomfortable a process to go through. But when I read what I started to write, then what the first draft was, the second draft, and then what we put out in the end, I think I said to someone the other day, look, you can still pick up professional books and find spelling errors and things like that in them. One of the things for us, I think, who are independent authors, self-published authors, you don't want, I mean, there's certain restrictions. We're not going to have the marketing support of a big publisher and all those things. But when somebody's got your book in their hand, you don't want them constantly thinking they're reading a book that's been written by somebody in their front bedroom that is not the real deal. You want them to be reading that book and judging it against everything else that they read. Not being easy on you because you've got a day job or whatever. You want them to read it and be in the moment and not snatched away because you've got spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, all these things. And so we have to invest the time and effort, and we have to put ourselves on the line and be willing to get it taken apart until it's as close to the real deal as it can be. So so far, people have been reading it and measuring my book against everything else they're reading, and that's a huge success when we're able to achieve that without all the support that goes with having, I mean, I'd rather have a publishing deal, to be honest with you, but it is what it is, and we make the best of it.
Yeah. Well, see, what's funny about that with the editing and everything and finding mistakes and like when I sat down to work on my book in earnest, I first decided to reread what I consider is probably my favorite book, and that's American Gods by Neil Gaiman. And I have this beautiful ultimate edition, like it's engraved, and it's got beautiful artwork, and the pages, because it's a book about American gods, the pages are almost like Bible pages, you know what I mean? Like very thin, almost translucent, and it's a beautiful book. And I'm reading through it, again, arguably my favorite book ever written, and I'm finding typos and little errors in here. And again, written by one of the greatest authors of our time, Neil Gaiman. Are you kidding me? And it brought this realization to me, thankfully, before starting my writing, where I was like, okay, even one of the best writers in the world still has typos, and even his editors still miss stuff.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, as many editors as he's had, and this isn't even a first edition or anything. Like, this is it's been through some stuff. It's been through some edits and some reprints, and I'm still finding. So you're always gonna find a little something in there. And so what that did for me was it allowed me to turn my spelling and grammar brain off when I'm writing, to where I can just get the words down, even if they're not spelled correctly, just get them down and keep going. And more importantly, when sending it to critique partners and beta readers and all that, and I get back feedback from them, yes, there's always like, oh, well, you missed a comma here and this is spelled wrong and blah, blah, blah. And I use all that stuff and correct it, but it doesn't even, it's just white noise to me. It doesn't even register, because I'm looking for, what did they think about this character? What do they think about this plot point? Did this, spark ideas in their head? Do they have theories? Do they have questions? Are the mysteries, enticing? Do the characters make you want to know more about them? That's what I'm looking for from my critique partners and my beta readers. Like, yeah, give me all of the spelling corrections you want. Great, I'll take them. But it doesn't even faze me. It doesn't hurt my feelings, because the greatest writer in our time also makes typos.
No, sure. And I'm the same with this sequel now. Like, I've got the sequel, you've got the editing bit that I want done, but you're right. I'm really excited about the story. Like, everybody who's just read the first one, now it's out, I keep having to just I'm hovering over, sending a message saying, can I send you a copy of the second one so you can read it? And like, I'm just like, no, it's not done yet. People have just read the finished version. and you're so excited for people to just read the story, and you have to kind of rein that in. And yeah, but it's I haven't read American Gods, so I'm gonna have to. That'll be your. We'll do an exchange. You get Joe Abercrombie, and I'll get Neil Gaiman, right?
I wrote Joe Abercrombie. You get Neil Gaiman, and that's funny because Neil Gaiman is one of yours. He's a Brit, so
yeah.
you know.
I have some Neil Gaiman books on my shelf. I just haven't got to them yet. But that's a fair trade.
American Gods is one of my favorite, and this looks quite intimidating, but it's not actually that big because there's also a short story that they attach on the end because it's in the same world. So it's you know, really like 2/3 of this is the actual novel, and so it's actually a pretty breezy read compared to some of the bigger stuff that I read, but it's this incredible story, again written by a British author, but it takes place in America. It's a road trip. Like you go all throughout America to all these places that actually exist, and he puts this supernatural spin on all of them. And there's this, you know, war happening between the old gods and the new gods, and of course a person who's trapped in between the two and having to navigate that new world.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I think you would really like it. It's really, really good. Neil Gaiman does that thing where he takes fantastical elements and almost, you know, all powerful godlike, you know, entities, and makes them a thing or a person or a place. You know, like that's what he does. Like this place is a god, or this person is a god, or this thing is a god, and they're interacting with each other. And by them interacting with each other, you're getting like this layered story of like this incredible, you know, epic fantasy, but it's happening in a room with two people talking. It's crazy how he does that stuff. It's incredible. A lot of praise for it in the chat. Kent and Lucy both really enjoyed it, so it's highly recommended. But man, am I excited about The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie? I am in.
Yeah, you'll love it.
That sounds really good. That sounds really, really good. My friend, where can everybody find you? Do you have a website? I know I have some. I have your Instagram down below, I believe.
Yeah, it's one of those tough things. In short, I felt like I was just kind of annoying all my friends and family on Facebook, so I needed to find a new home for myself, and Instagram was that place. And fortunately, because the cover looks good, I've had a lot of people who have been willing to give it a go and have given some brilliant support. So Instagram really at the moment is where I'm at, and then in terms of if anybody at any point feels inspired to take a little bit more of a look at the book, then I'm on Amazon for sort of worldwide distribution if anybody fancies picking it up, and I'm also on Kindle Unlimited. So I said to my wife the other day, if somebody doesn't read me on Kindle Unlimited, it means I literally cannot give my book away, and that is quite a tough thing to swallow. So.
No beaches. There's a lot of books out there. I do have the link for your Amazon page down below, so everybody can just click on it and go right to buying your book. It's actually very affordable. It's not a very expensive book at all, so I highly recommend everybody go over there.
And it doesn't necessarily mean it's value for money, though, Adrian. Let's keep that in mind.
And I do have it on my Kindle, by the way. I haven't started reading it yet, but it is definitely on my to be read pile in there. So it's happening, brother. Very cool. Do you know roundabout when the next book will be out?
Yeah, October 11th. Yeah.
Ooh, very nice. That's right around my birthday. It's 10 days before my birthday. Perfect.
There you go. It's the day after my wife's birthday, so she's got quite a handy little deadline to get that thing edited. So that's the beauty of it.
You come to her. Is it done yet?
Is it done? Yeah. Now the birthday can begin. Yeah. So hopefully, if anyone kind of gets to it now, they won't have too long to wait, and hopefully the book is set up in a way where, you know, most people who have read it are kind of keen to read on. So if anyone has any joy with it, I'd always love to hear from them, and it's always great to speak about it a bit more. So it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, man. It's been really nice having you on here. It was a really great talk. We had some interaction from the chat, which makes me really happy. You mentioned earlier that we are a part of an author group on Instagram. I wanted to shout it out because I haven't actually spoken about it on this channel yet. It's if you go to the user Indie Author Support, they're the ones running these groups. You can contact them through the Instagram messaging and let them know that you want to be a part of it. And they have a fantasy group, they have a sci-fi group, they have an LGBTQ group, a romance group. So you can be a part of these groups with other authors that write in these same categories and genres, and share input, share your work. and we all help each other out on Instagram. There, we share each other's posts and everything, and follow each other, and just get our numbers as high as possible, and try to break that freaking algorithm, man, because it's stacked against everybody. It's stacked against us. So please check it out if any of you are interested. Myself, I'm on Instagram as well. I'm on there, Books by Adrian with underscores. You can find those links down below. You can find, Tom Dumbrell's Instagram as well in the description down below. So check it out. Go check out his stuff. Go check out his book. He's got his second book coming up. This is all very exciting stuff. I would not only love to read your first book pretty soon. I'm going to dive into the second one when it comes out, and I would love to send you some sample chapters if you're at all interested. I would love your feedback on my
Absolutely.
on my tome.
Yeah.
In
Awesome.
fact, I tried to like put everything out on Front Street. This is another thing that I learned from Neil Gaiman in American Gods. He made a point on the very first page, in the very first paragraph, to include as many F-bombs as possible to make people who don't like that sort of thing put the book down and walk away, because it's only going to get worse from there.
Yeah.
And at the end of the first chapter, he ends it with a little like interlude, a little short story where we meet. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but we meet a particular goddess who does something so fantastical and disturbing and intriguing and just so off the wall weird that you go, okay, that's the kind of book I'm in, because if that's what we're doing, like it weeds out anybody who's not. So I chose to do that with my book, in the sense that it's going to be a bigger book. There's going to be a lot of chapters, a lot of words. The prologue is the biggest chapter in the book. It's like 8,000 words. The prologue is way too big. It's a short story. The prologue is a short story.
Wow.
Yeah,
Love
and
that.
then it's like, if you can't roll with the prologue, just put the book down and get the fuck out of here,
move on.
because it's only going to get worse from here.
Brilliant. Love that.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Tom, thank you for coming. You are always welcome back. Anytime you want to come on and plug something, or if you have a topic that you want to cover on Livestream Sunday, just shoot it over at me, man. I love new ideas, and we'll get you back on here, and we'll do some more stuff on here.
Great stuff.
We'll need to talk about editing when the time comes.
For sure. You know how to get hold of me.
Stick around for a few minutes, because once the broadcast ends, we'll debrief at the end, so to speak. Let's see here. Fab Stream, thanks for the topic. Sorry, missed that's all right, man. You thank you for coming. Great stream, guys. All right, thank you guys so much for all the love. Make sure that you like, comment, subscribe down below. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it when I do one of these great live stream Sundays. I do it every Sunday, 4 p.m. Next Sunday is Mother's Day, so call your mom and don't come here, because there's not going to be anything for you here. I'm going to be with my wife, because she's a mom. But the following Sunday, the 16th, we will have my good friend, I mentioned him earlier, Adrian Guadalupe. I've known him since second grade. He's my best friend in the world, and now our children play together and call each other best friends. That's how we roll over here. He's coming on to talk to us about music and how to do storytelling through music, and he will demonstrate by scoring live in front of us. He will score the flash fiction that won my contest a few weeks back. So there's going to be a nice little like audiobook reading of the story, and he's going to score it, and we're going to learn so much about storytelling through his music. It's going to be awesome. So please come back on the 16th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for that one. Thanks again, guys, for being here. Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was awesome. All right, let's sign off here, everybody. Here we go. See you next time.